Game 3 by EveryShadeOfHappy. Read by Rat Overlord. Summary: Paintball and Talks.
This will be for one class period only, instead of being a continuous game, and it doesn't have much variation from regular paintball. It will be a free-for-all for the entire class period of Foundational Heroics. Also,
Aizawa pauses.
You're not able to get out. Each hit will be considered a point against you, and if any of the paintballs hits a vital point, then your grade halves, but you will have limited ammunition.
This time, the class is quiet except for Isuku, who raises his hand to the surprise of absolutely nobody.
Yes, Midoriya?
I just have a couple of questions, then I'll be good.
Go ahead.
Are we allowed to bring equipment to the game? And is there anything that would get you disqualified? And my last question is about team-ups. Are they allowed? Aizawa nods. He's come to expect this after these last 2 games.
You can bring any equipment to the game as you see fit, and the only thing that will get you disqualified is if you grievously harm another student. As for team-ups, for this ground, they aren't allowed. Any other questions?
The class shakes their heads. Aizawa smirks.
Good. Now, until Foundational Heroics, you will be spending the next few hours with Snipe. It would be foolish to let kids who don't know the basics about handling guns safely have guns, even if they are just paintballs. Except you, Midoriya. We have a meeting with the principal.
He motions to the door, and Isuku gets up slowly. He knows exactly what this is about, but it still sends a tinkle of dread coursing through his veins. The walk to Nezu's office is quiet, Aizawa not offering any conversation, and Isuku not attempting to start one either. When they reach the door, it opens before Aizawa can touch the door. It's typical for the rat, so Aizawa merely ignores it. Isuku isn't surprised either, expecting nothing less from a genius rat who takes pleasure in psychological warfare. "Hello, Midoriya. How are you today?" Nezu purrs, eyes just a little too sharp as he gestures for Isuku to take a seat. Isuku does, smiling softly. He needs to tread lightly here. "I'm well, and you, Principal?" "Well, I'm excellent. Thank you for asking." The door shuts behind Isuku, and when he turns to glance behind him, Aizawa is gone. "He wasn't needed for this conversation. I just wanted him to walk you here for our chat." "And what do you want to talk about, Nezu?" Isuku asks quietly. Nezu chortles and takes a sip of tea. "That's an excellent question, Midoriya-kun. I was just hoping you could clear up a few things for me, of course." Isuku nods and waits patiently. Nezu offers him some tea, which Isuku gladly accepts. "Now, I'm afraid I will admit that when All Might told me about his successor, I did not do much digging besides the bare minimum. Yagi was an amazing hero, but he's always been more of a punch-first, think-later type of person, and I expected you to be much the same. When I checked your records, they reflected my thoughts exactly. Average grades, and more than multiple accounts of getting into fights. I didn't hold that against you, of course. You're young and hormonal. It's to be expected." Isuku's eye twitches slightly at the mention of school records that had been doctored to give him less of a chance of getting into UA and making Ka-chan look better. "Since then, you've mostly flown under the radar, or acted exactly how I expected. Until recently, that is." Isuku clears his throat nervously. What do you mean, sir?" "You're smarter than you let on, and quite frankly, you have skills that a normal person would not have. Aizawa noticed it in the first game and brought it to my attention. In his words, anyone with a flashy quirk like Midoriya's never bother to cultivate other skills. It's not adding up. I, of course, had access to vital information Aizawa is missing, such as the fact that you were quirkless before this, but I still chose to keep an eye on you in case there was merit to his words." "I'm still confused, sir. Is there a point to this, or—" Isuku mutters quietly. He knows exactly where this is heading, and he'd rather get it out of the way. "What do you write in that notebook you're always carrying around?" It gives Isuku whiplash how quickly the subject changes. "What?" "Your notebook. What do you write in it? Quirk analysis? This isn't what he was expecting. Accused of cheating, or maybe questioned about the hacking, sure. But his notebook? Do you have it on you? Isuku nods. It's always on him, and currently it's in the bright yellow backpack leaning against his feet. May I see it? Isuku hesitates before he answers. The last time someone besides him touched it, it was thrown into a koi pond. But eventually he hands it over. Sure. Isuku's fingers tremble as he unzips the bag and fishes it out. It's still the same beaten one he's had since middle school. He's been kept so busy he barely has time to write in it, let alone start a new one. Nezu flips through it for a few minutes, and Isuku's apprehension grows the wider Nezu's smile gets. After about 10 minutes of silent parsing, Nezu hands the notebook back with a feral grin. As I thought. Nezu stares at Isuku, eyes basically boring into his very soul. Have you ever taken an IQ test? Isuku shakes his head, and Nezu's eyes gleam manically. Midoriya, I will be frank with you. There has never been a soul alive that has managed to hack into my camera network, let alone undetected. I wouldn't have known if I hadn't seen you watching the cameras through your chest camera. He raises a paw when Isuku goes to say something. I'm not mad, quite contrary. Really? Isuku asks skeptically. Indeed. In fact, I'm ecstatic. Your analysis is above anything I've ever seen besides my own, but I do have a few concerns now that my suspicions are confirmed. The fact of the matter is that you might have a genius IQ and not even know it. After the games, I'd like for you to take an IQ test for me. Okay, Isuku mumbles, sipping at the tea Nezu has set in front of him. Now about those concerns. I am well aware of the struggles the quirkless go through. Alas, I took one look at the smile you always seem to have on and assumed that you had perhaps been spared of this fate. You're quite good, I'm asking, young man. Isuku tenses. He's never been called out for his behavior before. If I'm being honest, I probably wouldn't have ever known if not for these games. The skills you seem to have, the ability to go undetected and hide under everyone's radar. It's something you're used to, and it shouldn't be. Not to mention your grades should be quite higher, now and in middle school. I know my own staff well enough to know that they wouldn't purposely dock your points, so at least right now you are sabotaging yourself. Perhaps because you used to do it in middle school? Nezu hits it right on the nose, and Isuku struggles not to show it. I'll be going back through all of your papers, anything I think you purposely failed, and you'll be retaking them. I'll also be looking into your school because, to be quite frank, I believe they abused you. No! Isuku yelps. He can redo his assignments and be found out for scoring lower on purpose, but the last thing he needs is for his middle school to be investigated. This isn't up for negotiation, Midoriya. Nezu pauses until Isuku looks at him. I would do this for any of my students, including you. I take abuse very seriously due to personal reasons, so I need you to trust me that I won't do anything to hurt you. I know that might be hard, but I promise I won't do you any harm. I would also like to offer you an apology. You are good at masking, but it was no excuse to not notice something was wrong until recently. Even your little hidey hole in the vents should have ticked me off. It was a grievous error to not notice, but I promise I won't allow anything else to be overlooked. It's clear he won't be persuaded otherwise, so Isuku sits back with a slump. Something in his chest twinges at the apology, but he does his best to ignore it. Okay. Now, final business. I want to mentor you if you'll allow it. Isuku blinks rapidly. Me? Yes, Midoriya. You want to be a hero, correct? Yes, of course. Well, I feel it important to point out to you that you are not All Might. He is a punch first, think later kind of person, but you don't need to be. You have many talents at your fingertips. It would be such a waste to not use them simply because you think All Might won't approve. Again, Nezu hits it right on the nose. Be your own kind of hero. And I want you to know that even if All Might hadn't given you his quirk, I still think you could have been a marvelous hero. Tears begin to fill Isuku's eyes as he struggles not to cry. It's the first time he's been told that. Not even his idol had believed he could. not his mom or Kachan. But the being with the highest IQ ever recorded thought he could. "So, will you be my personal student, Midoriya?" Isuku nods quickly. "Yes." It's a lot to think about, but it wasn't a chance he could pass up. "Then thank you for trusting me with you, Midoriya. We'll talk more after the games to hammer out and finish some of the finer details, but for your first assignment, I want you to try your hardest. No more slacking off." Isuku pauses. I understand you want to give your friends a chance, but villains just won't do that. And you won't grow if you go easy on them. So, give it your all, even if it means demolishing them. They will only learn from the experience." Isuku nods and gets up to leave. As he shuts the door, Nezu has one last thing to say. "Stop hiding who you really are and show them your true potential, Midoriya. I promise you won't regret it." As Isuku walks away, he's filled with renewed confidence. He's going to give it his all because his friends deserve his all, which means he needs to prepare. First stop, Hatsume. No more hiding or pretending to be something else. He's going to take them all by storm. It's a quick stop, and then Isuku is directed to head to Gamma Field A to work on his sharpshooting. Each step towards the shooting range brings back painful memories if Isuku's being honest. He'd been wrong when he claimed that Nezu was the first to believe in him. His first supporter had come in the form of a larger-than-life father. Right up until Isuku's 7th birthday, Isuku had his father right by his side, with uproarious laughter and a jovial smile. When his mother had fallen by his side and apologized for his quirklessness, his father had simply scoffed.
"Pfft, quirks are just tools, kiddo. All it means is that we need to get you a tool of your own,
Isuku had been 4 when he first picked up a gun under the supervision of his dad. His mother hadn't approved, of course, and after his dad died, she'd banned them from the house. Not that Isuku had the desire to pick one up after. It had been a heart attack, of all things. No villain to blame, or a natural disaster. Just his dad's own body turning against him. It had been quick. One moment, Isuku was being thrown into the air, and the next, he landed on his dad's collapsed body. Parents from the park gathering around and ushering Isuku away. No chance to say goodbye. No warning, just gone. Isuku hasn't picked up a gun since then, and he's sure he's rusty, but it's time to pick up his dad's legacy and stop holding back. When Isuku enters the gun range, Aizawa stops him with a hand on his shoulder.
"You okay?"
He asks quietly, face buried in his scarf. Isuku nods, and Aizawa takes it at face value, letting Isuku go and stepping back.
"All right, Snipe set aside a booth for you. Don't try to shoot until he's spoken to you about gun safety and such. It's in the corner."
He points to the booths his classmates are currently in. It's just a line of stalls and targets about 50 meters back that his classmates are trying to aim at. Isuku takes note of the people who seem to be excelling at the shooting. Momo, to the surprise of nobody, she shoots off cannons regularly, and Mina is a decent shot. Kachan isn't half bad either, or Kaminari. Maybe it's because their quirks require precision? Isuku isn't sure, but other than those 4, the others are mediocre at best. Isuku heads to his assigned booth and waits there patiently. Snipe, who'd been helping Mineta, shows up shortly after and begins to go over gun safety. After about 20 minutes of lecturing, Isuku is allowed to put on the goggles and noise-canceling headphones and try his shot at shooting. Snipe doesn't stick around after hearing a shout of distress from Mineta, leaving Isuku to his own devices. Isuku takes a deep breath before picking up the handgun, the weight of familiar sensation in his hand. He sets it down after a moment to pick up the rifle. He looks through the sight and spends a few minutes adjusting to the weight of the trigger, the gun, the scope. When it feels familiar enough to begin, Isuku gets in a proper position and begins to fire. It sends a thrill of satisfaction down his spine to watch the paintball hit the bullseye in the middle of the target. Isuku spends the next few hours in a trance, switching through the various gun options and shooting until he runs out of ammo. He's rusty, but the more he shoots, the steadier his aim gets. When they're dismissed in the last hour before the game to prepare, Isuku leaves his target behind for the teachers to look at. Snipe spends a few minutes going down the line and glancing at the various paper targets. There were a few good shots, especially for beginners, but nobody made him do a double take. At least until he gets to the end of the line where Midoriya had sat. "Aizawa," said teacher sits up from his yellow cocoon.
Has Midoriya had any previous training?" "Not as far as I know. Why?" "Just come look at this."
With a tired sigh, Aizawa does just that, dragging himself out of his cocoon to make his way to Midoriya Station. Snipe is actually in the range itself, inspecting the target set on the wall. Aizawa joins him soon enough to see what the problem is, and draws up short. The target had been changed twice, the other two sitting underneath the third. The first one Midoriya had used was just a little splotchy, but most were bullseyes. But as he progresses through the targets, the splotches go away, and the shooting becomes cleaner. And the third and final target, which is still hanging up, was exactly one spot covered in paint. The 2-inch bullseye in the middle of the paper bullseye. A thick coat of paint, different colors layered over the exact same spot.
"What in the absolute fuck are you teaching these kids, Aizawa?"
Snipe whispers.
"I couldn't shoot like this if I didn't have my quirk, but your kiddo just decimated my course after just a few practice shots. That's ridiculous." "I didn't teach him this. I called dibs."
Snipe mutters in awe. He hasn't seen such raw talent like this in a very long time. He's broken out of his thoughts of teaching Midoriya how to use a gun in battle by Aizawa's snort.
"Get in line."
"Hell you mean by that, partner?"
"I mean that All Might already has his sights on the boy, and now Nezu does as well after seeing the boy hack into his cameras. Oh, and I'm interested as well. The boy would do well in underground heroics, so you'll have to fight at least 3 teachers for him."
Snipe whistles slowly. "For talent like that, I just might."
"Well, you can ask him to be your student after the games. Let's go."
The two leave and begin to head for the battleground the kids would be fighting on. Everyone is already there, most of the kids setting up a place to be their base. The teachers as well sit in an observation room, watching the various screens of kids preparing. All of them would be helping grade the kids. Aizawa spots his husband next to Nezu and meanders over, sitting down next to Mike with a small sigh.
"Anything interesting yet?"
Mike shakes his head. "No, we haven't seen Midoriya on the screens yet. I'm curious as to where he is."
"I'm not sure. He left with the others, but I will say he's one hell of a shot. Mike wants him as a student."
Netsu's ears perk up at that, and he sends a sly glance at Snipe. He was going to have more competition after all.
"Really? I thought you wanted him."
Hisashi purrs in his ear. Aizawa shrugs.
"I'm still gonna offer, but I doubt he'll take it. That kid would flourish in underground heroics. He's so fucking good at sneaking around, staying out of sight. Even his fighting style would work for it, but I doubt he'll accept. We'll see."
Their conversation is cut short when Nezu stands and claps his hands. "All right, it's time to begin. I'll start the counter," Nezu announces, hitting the start button, which would start a countdown for the others to hear. 10. Isuku is just tying off the last knot when he hears the timer begin to go off. 9. Isuku slings the gun back onto his back and heads to the tallest point in the city. 8. Isuku scales the side of the building to the 3rd floor, easily slipping past the traps he'd laid. 7. Isuku counts his paintballs, just enough to hit his classmates twice each. Not much room for error. 6. Isuku makes sure the cameras are still focused on his classmates on his phone. 5. Isuku throws his hood on and a mask to cover his features. 4. He slips back out the door, resetting the traps in the room as he leaves. Hatsume had had plenty of nasty treats for him to use. 3. Isuku loads the cartridge to his rifle. 2. He climbs onto the fire escape to lie and wait. 1. Start! His plan was simple. Trap his classmates and decimate them. First thought, he'd use himself as bait. A glance at the camera show at least 5 are in an all-out war, not too far from here. Jiro is in fact there, using her ear jacks to evade the flying paintballs. If anything, he'll be able to get her, but Mineta, Sato, Aoyama, and Mina shouldn't be too hard to trap either. He creeps onto the rooftop above the fight and peers out over the edge and counts. Yep, exactly 5, which shouldn't be a problem for him. He pulls the mask down and scuffs his sneakers on the roof. Jiro whips her head around, gun held defensively. Her quick reaction causes the others to take notice as well, all of them looking at him in a matter of seconds. He smiles wickedly and raises his gun. "You want revenge, right, Jiro? Come and get me," he taunts before taking off. He leaps off the roof and waits for the telltale pounding of footsteps to follow before he moves. As he'd thought, all 5 followed him, wanting to prove their worth by taking out the guy who'd been unstoppable the entire time.
"Stop running, you jerk!"
Jiro yells angrily as Izuku barely dodges the paintball that flies by. Izuku takes a sharp right, ducking under one of the steel cables he'd set up. It doesn't take long after that, him leading them further into his trap for them to fall into one. Aoyama is the first to go, stepping onto a tripwire that causes a net to fly out and trap him against the side of a building. It's strong enough that even his stomach laser can't do anything. Hatsume really is a genius. Sato stops to try and help him, forgetting that it's a competition, which is his doom. In an attempt to untangle Aoyama, he gets entangled as well, and both are left on the wall, trapped like flies. One misplaced step, and Mineta is trapped in a rapidly expanding foam until only his head is showing in the glittering foam. Mina quickly realizes that she's been led into a series of traps and stops running after him, but is taken out by a loop trap left dangling upside down from a light post. Jiro is knocked to the side by a sound wave explosion, her head ringing from the loud noises, and Izuku easily handcuffs her to a pole, leaving them at his mercy, which he shows absolutely none of. He backtracks after he no longer is being chased and steals each of their ammo, only to unload it into their waiting bodies, making sure to only hit the vests they'd been provided with. He leaves most in the traps, except Mina, since he doesn't want her to pass out from the blood rush. He leaves them with their unloaded guns and takes off. The rest of the game passes much the same way, Izuku leading groups of 1 to 7 people around the area he'd claimed, leaving them hanging from various buildings or tied up in the streets. He doesn't take everyone out, of course, most people wising up after they come across a trapped person and refusing to follow Izuku. For those, Izuku simply follows them from the rooftop, occasionally dropping in front of them to shoot them directly in the heart before disappearing again. When he comes across people fighting in the streets, like Kachan and Todoroki, he simply snipes them from above before disappearing. Momo proves to be a bit of a problem. She's smarter than most give her credit, and a decent shot. At one point, she creates a mini cannon and uses it to shoot the tiny projectiles. It had been a bitch to dodge, but in the end, Izuku had been successful in trapping her against Jiro by using her soft heart and crush against her. By the time the lesson comes to a close, the last one standing is Izuku, and he's the only one not covered in paint. When the teachers come to collect the bedraggled group and undo the traps Izuku set, Izuku is met with a smile and a nod from Nezu, Aizawa, and Snipe. He'd done good. And Izuku can't help the glow of pride located in his chest. It felt good not to hold back anymore. Though the teachers might have a bit of trouble getting to Sero, Izuku had used his own tape to tie him to the top of a building's electricity rod after all. Hey, thanks for listening to my podfic of Game 3 by EveryShadeOfHappy. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to leave comments or kudos down below. And make sure to check out the original author, because they have a lot of really great content that you'll definitely enjoy reading. I know I did. And yeah, thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed.